So first of all, a bit of introduction. So hello, good evening, and welcome to this evening's Cooperation Live, where we're going to be talking about action on retail crime. My name is Emma Foodie. I'm Assistant General Secretary at the Co-operative Party, and it's a pleasure to be able to welcome you this evening for this really important discussion. So thanks for joining us this evening on what is a stormy night in some parts of the country, but we're going to be talking about this really important issue, and we're going to hear for some really exciting, inspiring speakers tonight. So just to start with a little bit of housekeeping though, everyone's on mute on joining the call. That's just to make sure that we can limit the background noise and ensure that the quality of the sound is as good as it can be for our speakers. If we get to questions and it's your turn to ask a question or something like that, then we'll unmute you at that point, so you'll be able to ask it. In addition to that, just to flag that closed captioning is available. We are currently trialling the use of Zoom's automatic captioning tool to make the event as accessible as we can. So if you do need to view the captions, if you press the CC in the tools strip at the bottom of the Zoom screen, you should be able to access it there. In addition to that, we'd really love it if you had your videos on for this call. It certainly helps to make for a much more interactive kind of discussion, but completely understand and appreciate that that's not always possible for everyone if you've got other things going on or for any other reason. So if you do want to switch your camera off, then you're absolutely fine to do so. Also, just to flag that we do record these sessions. We realise not everyone can necessarily make 6 o'clock on a Wednesday, so we do make these videos available on our YouTube channel, so that people are able to go back and watch them at their own leisure. So if that's someone that you know, or if you have to drop the call for any reason, you'll be able to watch it back at additional time on YouTube there. So just in terms of introducing our guests for this evening, so I'm really delighted that we're joined today by Paul Dennis, who's Chief Operations Officer at Central England Co-op. We're also joined by Emily Spurrell, who's our Labour and Co-operative Police and Crime Commissioner for Merseyside. And we're also due to be joined by Paul Gerrard, who is Campaigns, Public Affairs and Board Secretariat Director at the Co-op Group. I think he's just running a little bit late, but I'm sure he'll be joining the call as soon as he's able to. Before we hear from our speakers in just a moment, I did just want to set a bit of context for the discussion that we're going to be having today, which, as I said before, is a very serious one. There is an epidemic of crime on our high streets. According to data released by the Co-op earlier this summer, criminal acts in retail stores have jumped 35% since the beginning of this year. That's more than 175,000 incidents that have been recorded, amounting to almost 1,000 incidents every single day. That's frontline store workers that have seen physical assaults increase year on year by 30%, and antisocial behaviour and verbal abuse rising by 20%. Now, we at the Co-operative Party have campaigned and worked hard on this issue for a number of years, in conjunction with our societies, with our elected representatives, and of course with our trade union colleagues with Usdaw. And we're really proud that we've managed to achieve some really significant and important protections and wins in this campaign along the way. But it really does feel like at the moment that our high streets are at a real moment of crisis, and there is more of an imperative than there has ever been in terms of a call to action, not least when reflecting on those figures from just a moment ago. So I know we're very keen to hear from our speakers to reflect, as I say, on the campaign so far and on the very stark reality that's in our shops and in our high streets at the moment, and what we can all do in terms of taking this campaign forward, taking actions forward, and campaigning for safer communities for all of us. So we'll hear from each of our speakers in turn, and then we'll try and fit in some questions. So if you want to pop your questions in the chat, or we'll try and take a round when our speakers have finished talking. But first of all, if I can hand over to Paul from Central England.
Okay, thank you, Emma. Thanks for the brilliant setup, and thank you to everyone who's come on the call tonight. And I agree, I think this is a crucial time, and I really value your support. So I'll try and do this justice, and I think keep it fairly conversational, I think, because that's real, isn't it? A little bit about myself. So I'm Paul Dennis. I'm the Chief Ops Officer, grant title for the Co-op in Central Co-op. So we operate across 20 counties, 268 communities, more importantly, and we have 268 food stores. So I'm privileged to lead 6,000 brilliant colleagues. So it's a subject close to all of our hearts. So thank you for coming on today and giving us your time. I do want to give a shout out to start with that, the co-op party's right behind us. We've got a very active board. Thank you, Elaine, for enabling me to be on today. But it's a passion we share as an organisation, but it is starting to get some traction. And I won't call out all the names, but we have got your PCC candidates, Nicole. We've got some of your Labour candidates and Labour Party candidates, Catherine Atkins, Alice McDonald, Andrew Pakes, Gary Godden, Roy Palmer, Claire Ward. All these people within this party and this movement are actually supporting us and coming out and listening to colleagues. So I'm going to try and do some justice to this, but if you want the real picture, and some of you may already have this, talk to the teams in stores, because that's when you get a real picture. The words and the statistics are one thing, but they're becoming ingrained really, because this is day in, day out. So quick bit about my background, I guess. So I mean, I've been 38 years in retail. I've managed 14 shops, would you believe? I must have had a light paper ground or a heavy paper ground, depending on whether you see the grey. But I have managed stores in some of the toughest communities in the country. I've managed stores in Birmingham Small Heath, great team there, by the way. Tough area, Camden in London, Belfast, and I've even managed stores in Shubra and Helwan in Cairo. So I guess I kind of know some of the coal face, and I'm proud to have done that. It's a great career and it's a great job. I've had bottles swung at me, I've had a needle threat, I've been headbutted, I've had armed raiders in my career early on. But they were one-offs, so it was kind of a one-off. The teams now in our stores are facing this day in, day out. I was in Stamford Road yesterday over in Kettering. I got there at 12 o'clock. They'd had 3 incidents in the morning of shoplifting and 2 verbal assaults. That's 5 incidents in one day. So I think I know the drill, but I don't, because I'm not in it now, and it's completely different even to them. The difference, for me though, if I had a serious incident and I called the police, somebody came. And now I'm afraid that in 70% of opportunities where our teams call out and need support, nobody comes. Knightthorpe Road last month, 48 hours for a store detective and a colleague who were assaulted. So clearly Rory is really keen to look at that, the PCC candidate for Leicester. We will help him with the knowledge behind it, but we have to make a difference. It is so important. The mental health pressures of that. I mean, I can give you some stats that are quite close to us, because I think it's useful for the scale. 24,000 thefts, assaults, and incidents this year alone. Last year we had 13,000. Now that's bad enough, but essentially that's a huge rise. But I think the important number within it is that's 1,100 assaults and impacts on colleagues. And I know from my small experience of when the police came and we got supported, you take that home, to the family. It doesn't just stay in the shop, it affects everything in your life. So that's 1,100 families affected across 268 communities. So, I'm not doing it justice, because if you talk to our teams, they'll really bring it alive. But you can see the sense of the impact of this. It is huge. So having said that, there are solutions. So this isn't all doom and gloom. I think where we can actually work with police, where we can work closely, where we work closely with local authorities, a difference can be made. There are some horrific examples of it. So I'll share one because it's on my mind, because I saw Vicky at the weekend over at State Mill. She was spat in the face, and the police didn't come until my loss prevention team really chased, and we wrote to the local MP. Every incident that happens to one of our colleagues in our co-op stores, we write to the local MP and we write to central government. And again, do we get a response? Well, we get a response in about 60% of those. So essentially, we don't even get a response there. So we can make a real difference with this campaign that we're working together. And as co-op retailers, we're working with mid-counties and working with Paula, you'll hear from later, how we can join together to be a stronger force. And I guess that's what this movement's all about, isn't it? There's an incident and impact on colleagues, but I think there's a broader impact here. And it's kind of obvious, but I think we need to be aware of it. This is fueling the underworld. This is fueling there's a need for the meat, there's a need for these products, and it's organised, and it's never been as organised as it is. The £200 limit is not helpful, because somebody can get away with £150, £600 in a day, and it's under the £200 limit for a single incident. So we have to be more targeted as police crime commissioners and police and retailers to work together on this. But it's fueling a huge problem in society. It's fueling drugs, it's fueling drug sales, it's paying the rich people who don't even get their hands dirty, who are taking the profits, from the addicts, actually. It's destroying their lives as well. So there's lots of reasons to pick this, but I mean, I'm passionate about it because we've invested in drug rehabilitation in Birmingham, turned around 14 lives in the last 3 years, because these people need to have support as well, because they're pawns in a larger game. But we have to start facing into it and not treating it as a victimless crime, because it just isn't. Again, the investment we put in place for the society, because one of the questions I'd have if I was you, what are you doing about it, Paul? The board have signed off for us £4 million in the last 18 months. We put in Watch Me Now, little watchers that you push the button, somebody not in the store will dial in, and they'll report it to the police and call the police on behalf if it's a violent crime. We've got body cameras in place, and we invest, well, the thick end of £2.5 million in store detectives and guards. You're seeing the recent comments perhaps from the government around, well, you can do a citizen's arrest. Well, yeah, I can, but I can hold a shoplifter who might have a knife in an office out in the back. But then the police then come, so then you let them go. So that's just words, frankly. So we do need to get to the facts of all the facts behind this. So police response is huge. I think your party supported us because our society campaigned along with others for the 2022 Act, but we've got to use the legislation, right? It's fine having legislation, but if it's not applied, then no one's really getting the deterrent. So I think that's really important. But I said I was going to give you some good news. So in Nottingham, Hickings Lane, we were experiencing massive incidents from a small amount of perpetrators, which sometimes this is organised. We were with the police. In truth, my team did the donkey work of all the heavy lifting on the reporting and extra reports and photos. But we put the police supported us. We put away 3 perpetrators. The crime went from 30 every 2 weeks to none in February. So we can make a difference here if we work together. Again, we've got an incident in Hawthorne Road where we've got a gang of young people, and I won't go down that particular rabbit hole, but we need to do more for young people in our society. But if they've got nothing to do and they're badly led, then we had a gang of 20 coming and just looting, just taking everything and walking out. Now, we tell our colleagues not to put themselves in the face of danger, and we absolutely will continue to do that, because I've had acid thrown in the colleagues' face in Welland Vale and Kettering and various other nasty incidents. But so the war can just raid completely, but won't be deterred. But the police have been on site. The PCSO is now, it's part of the beat. A police car parked outside. We are solving that problem. Not solved yet, but we can make a difference with it. So there are ways through, but we do need the support. And we need the absolutely police crime commissioners to have the pledge, but then follow through on those pledges. And thank you to those of you on the call. If you can pass that feedback through, it's really good. As well as the investment, though, where we put our money, you'll know as a co-op business, we put our money back into the communities. So if I'm spending £4 million on loss prevention, and theft used to cost 0.2%, 0.2 pence in the pound. So my career has always been about 0.2 pence in the pound. We're now losing 1.1 pence in the pound. Now that's the thick end of 2.5 million we know about that's just walking out the door. So if you add up what I'm spending on loss prevention and what I'm losing extra on theft, we could put £7 million back in the community and certainly back into investment. And so it's a really important subject to solve because of that as well. And also, we have a community fund. We put back into the communities we work in. Our colleagues live and work in those communities. They understand what that community needs, and it's part of our DNA and makeup. But it's being siphoned away by people in organised crime and going to other causes and funding bad stuff. We also need to invest in price. I mean, we all see in the inflation, we have a huge amount of members offers. And just to probably come shopped in one of our stores, it's amazing. You get bread for 75p. But if you remember, having said that, we could do more of that if we could invest more of this back in, because it is a huge number when you add it all up. And I guess finally, because I've given 10 minutes, I could probably talk for ages on this. but it'd be great to get some questions. We do need to make a broader move here. We are passionately committed to paying our colleagues more money. We really want to pay them at the top quartile of our industry pay, and we've invested heavily in this, and we're planning another 5 million next year. But you can see that the extent of this, where the 6 million could go. We need to. I mean, I'm from a family of working class miners for years until I became a retailer after my granddad. But essentially, work paid. You could earn a living and earn a decent living. And I do think we want to invest in pay as a co-op. And this is almost holding us back or not causing us to go as quickly as we would absolutely like. And we're really committed to that. But more broadly, we've got to work together in communities. We've got to make sure that work pays. And we've got to just make sure all the boats can rise, because if we can do that, then it takes away the need to have to go in there the pub and buy cheap meat that's been stolen from the co-op. We've got to break that vicious cycle and break through it. But we've got to do something different. We've got to do some different thoughts behind it, I think. And that starts with lots of different areas that I'm no politician, but I'm sure, you know, you as a party talk about all the time. I was particularly pleased that Alex Norris came along to our conference, and he's also been in the thick of it, talking to our colleagues. And I think that's what we need more of. We need to know what the truth is, and then we need to talk it to power, or the people who can make a difference to power. And I'm very grateful for that, actually. And again, that grows belief with our teams that something is going to be different and going to be done. You've got to start somewhere. You've got to get the ball rolling. And that's really what we're doing with the campaign, working with us still. So if I have my 10 minutes, I'll probably have some of this shut up and hand back to but thank you for listening.
Thanks so much, Paul. And I think it's really helpful and really, you know, eye-opening to hear those very specific and horrific experiences of colleagues at Central England. So thank you for putting it in that context as to what's happening in stores at the moment. I'm going to bring in Emily now. She's our next speaker. As I said, Emily is a Labour and Co-operative Police and Crime Commissioner in Merseyside. So over to you, Emily.
Hi, thanks, Emma, and thanks very much for having me to come and speak today. So I'm a Police and Crime Commissioner. I'm in Merseyside. I was elected about 2.5 years ago, coming up to re-election in May. And I suppose just to give you some context, probably most of you will know this by now, but Police and Crime Commissioners were elected to be the public voice in policing. We are there to hold the police to account, specifically chief constables, make sure they deliver on our priorities that we set as part of our police and crime plan, based on what we think the public who elected us, you know, what they're concerned about. And we also have lots of other roles around crime prevention and supporting victims of crime. So it's a big role, but I think the key one for today is that accountability piece, and how do we make sure that chiefs and policing are responding to the concerns of the public. So I published my plan during the election 3 years ago, and retail crime was one of the issues that I included within it, recognising, I think, particularly the wider retail crime, but also the amount of shop workers who were facing violence and abuse. And it's something I was really welcoming the campaign that the Co-op and Ulster and others ran, because actually it's a huge issue, and nobody should be facing violence and abuse at work just for simply doing their job. And they're also a really key part of the journey for us. So in terms of there were lifelines during COVID, sometimes they were the only people that anyone would speak to. But also when we think about crime prevention, shop workers are the ones who will refuse to sell fireworks to people. They will refuse to sell knives to kids who are too young, who shouldn't have them. So actually they're a really key part of how we prevent crime from happening within our communities. So I think it's right that actually when issues are happening and when they're facing this violence and abuse, that we should be there to back them up. And I think sometimes we view shoplifting as being too low level, and it's not taken maybe as seriously as it should be. Not because I think people don't take theft seriously, but I think when you consider all the kind of competing priorities and demands that particularly is on policing at the minute, I think sometimes we just say shoplifting, oh, that's somebody's just robbed a sandwich. And of course, as Paul's outlined, we know it can be a lot more than that. And so making sure that we understand the scale of the issue, I think, is really important. So that's why I was keen to have it as a priority within my plan. So I think it's right, obviously, that businesses do take a proactive approach. And again, Paul's outlined some of that in terms of the work they do and the responsibility they have around helping to prevent thefts, employing security, cameras, those kind of things. But of course, it can't just be up to businesses to do this themselves. There has to be that backup from police to be there when they need it. I don't think we should be relying on people to do citizens arrests. I think that's a completely false way to do things. I think absolutely we have to work in partnership, help to gather the evidence, but police need to respond and back up businesses when they need it. And I think we recognise that hasn't always happened. And obviously Paul's outlined some examples of that. So last week at conference, I had a good conversation with colleagues from the Co-op group, including Paul G, who you're about to hear next. And I think it was a good reminder, really, that sometimes when we think about this, we particularly think about the vulnerability of those small independent stores, but actually it isn't, big chains like Co-op are affected by this as well. And it isn't just the shops themselves, it's the communities. These retail stores are a key part of our town centres. They're a key part of our communities. Our communities rely on them, and we know the impact that will have if shops continue to struggle and face the huge losses that they are currently facing. So it is a really important one. And again, as Paul said, speaking to staff is so important. I've done a couple of visits during my time as PCC. I'm due to go out to another one on Friday and meet some colleagues in the Co-op store as part of the Safer Business Week. And I think Paul's right. It's really important that we have those conversations because they will see it on the ground. It's not just a number. It's not just another crime report. There's a real person that will have experienced something potentially quite traumatic. And I think it's important that as PCCs, we spend that time listening to them and understanding what some of those challenges are. So in terms of some of the work I think that we can do and how we can take action, in Merseyside, we are trying to be quite proactive around it. I know the police certainly are trying to be proactive about it. My office is supporting the police to set up a police partnership with the local co-ops, looking at how we have fortnightly calls to make sure that they're highlighting key offenders, highlighting the hotspot locations, working out what police response is needed, making sure that data sharing, that information gathering is happening regularly, and that there's a direct line to the leads within the police. So if people have concerns, there is a route to do that. I've also funded and we work quite closely with some of our business partnerships. So people like the business improvement districts and some of those kind of business leaders. So I funded a radio link network, which has supported them to make sure that where you're seeing repeat offenders go to different stores, they've got that ability to communicate with each other, flag if somebody's out there causing trouble, and then obviously then that can link directly to the police as well. So I think trying to make sure we have some of those proactive steps is really key and something that we're looking at on Merseyside. One of the things I will say is that I think reporting is key. And I take what Paul says in terms of, I get there is a frustration where people do report and then maybe they don't get the response they want. As a PCC, we rely very heavily on the data. And actually, in terms of how we hold chief constables to account, we will look at the data, we will look at where the hotspots are, we will look at the figures. And if those figures don't point to a massive increase in retail crime, it's very difficult for us to then say to the chief, look, you're not doing enough here. There's been a big spike. You're not responding to it. So I think the first thing I would say is, always keep reporting it. I think nationally last year, we saw about 8 million incidents of customer theft, but only 5% were actually reported to police. So, and I think there's work we need to do around making it easier for businesses to report. And so it doesn't feel like such a kind of an onerous report system and maybe, bypassing the usual kind of routes through for the public. But I would always just say that reporting is so key because that is how we can shine a spotlight on the issue and make sure police are responding when they should be. The other bit I think as well is worth acknowledging, I know certainly for us on Merseyside, it's a key issue. And again, Paul alluded to it, is the links to other types of crime. So although it might just look like to us like somebody's gone and cleared a line of meat or a shelf or whatever it might be, chances are those individuals are involved in other things, particularly serious and organised crime, which is a huge challenge for us on Merseyside. There's a reason why we really prioritise it because of the harm it causes on the streets, but it can play out in different kinds of ways. It can play out in things like dog breeding, some of the incidents we've seen around dog attacks, that can quite often be linked to organised crime. So when we want to tackle organised crime, we have to recognise the links that retail crime has to that, and some of these individuals will be involved in that. And sometimes being able to identify and evidence the offending that's happened might be easier than trying to evidence the other criminal activity. But if you can get a conviction, then you can disrupt that criminal activity that's happening in another way. So I think it's really important that we look at this as a whole and don't just think, oh, it's just a shoplifting offence, because chances are it is linked to something much more serious. And that's something I know we are trying to do on Merseyside. Other action, particularly this week as part of the week of action we've got, is around targeting the premises that are selling the stolen goods. Because actually, if the gangs and the individuals who are stealing these items, if we can stop those places where they then sell them on and make the money, then that stops the demand coming through, and they'll hopefully move on to other things, or we'll find ways to prevent them doing other things. So I think targeting that kind of demand and those shops who are selling the stolen goods, a really key part of what police needs to do, but also licensing as well, partners with our council partners. Again, that cooperative approach, making sure that we're using all the different powers that we have. If the police can't get a conviction or can't take any action, can the licensing team that might have a lower threshold? So really trying to use all the powers that we've got within our gift to tackle it. And then the importance of neighbourhood policing. So, neighbourhood policing is something that we have talked about non-stop since I've come into office. And obviously the party have been really front and centre around this, which I really welcome, because a big part of it is that over the last 13 years, we have seen massive cuts to policing, and that has included neighbourhood policing. And that is a really key part, because those are the individuals who will be visible in the community. They will pop into the local stores, check in, see how they're doing, have those relationships. They'll also know the offenders, particularly if you've got kind of young offenders who are operating in the same area. They'll know who those people are, and we'll be able to go, oh yeah, that's Johnny so-and-so from down the road, and actually they can help to kind of build that intelligence picture. But because we've seen such massive cuts to that, I think that has definitely harmed the ability for policing to respond in that way. So I'm really welcome the commitment from Labour around increasing those numbers further and trying to give us back, particularly PCSOs, who are such a crucial neighbourhood resilience for things like this. And then the final thing I would just mention is then just actually what do we do about it? So, there's lots of talk around taking further action, removing the £200 limit, and I think making sure that we do treat it seriously, because it is a serious crime. But I also think it's how do we actually prevent that cycle of offending, which unfortunately for a lot of shoplifting offences, it is sometimes from those vulnerable people who are maybe stuck in a life of crime. Maybe it's around their mental health or their drug addiction. And so using things like rehabilitative programmes, out-of-court disposals, electronic tags, there's so much more I think we could be doing to proactively monitor the behaviour of these individuals. And actually then if they do break a tag and go into an area they shouldn't go to, it's then much easier to then trigger that and escalate the offence into the courts. So I think there's lots of proactive work that we should be doing. And again, I know it's being done across the country with PCCs and chiefs to look at how we can proactively manage some of those particular prolific offenders and try and just break that cycle of offending that we are seeing. So that's all I was going to touch on. I'm sure we'll have time for lots of questions, but just I suppose to reassure you, there's a huge amount of work happening nationally through the Association of PCCs. We really recognise the importance of this as an issue, and particularly how much of an increase it's seen recently. So we're all very engaged, I think, to look at how we can continue that partnership work to tackle it.
Thanks so much, Emily. It's really positive to hear the work that's being done from yourself and the office in Merseyside to tackle these events. To tackle these incidents. And I think also, looking ahead to PCC elections in May next year, I think it really underlines and reinforces the need for Labour and Co-op representatives in this role to be able to take forward these initiatives. Last of our speakers, but by no means least, we've got Paul Gerrard, who's joined us from the Co-op group. Paul, if I hand over to you.
Thank you, Emma, and apologies for being slightly late, and lovely to be with so many fellow cooperators. It's lovely to see David Hanson on the call, and I think it's worth remembering that this has been a long time to get to this point, and I think Alex Norris referred to the work that David did and that we all stand, and we all are building on the work that David did as the voice and the champion of shop workers in Parliament for many, many years. So David, love to see you on, and hopefully you're beginning to see some progress from your many years of hard work here. And I certainly think the work that David started and we've seen some progress with. So in Scotland, we now have, thanks to Daniel Johnson, MSP, a specific offence for attacking or abusing a shop worker. That's huge progress. There was progress, as Paul mentioned, last year when we got the attacking someone performing public service or performing public duty become an aggravated offence. That's progress, not as much as we would like, but progress. So I do think that we've made progress, and I would say that the cooperative movement, be that parliamentary MPs like Alex Norris and others, or be it retail societies like my colleagues in Central or ourselves in Group, or local co-op councillors, have made a huge difference in getting us to where we've got to. I'm not going to repeat what Paul said because he said it much better than me. Just add a tiny bit more flavour to it. We Co-op Group run 2,500 stores across the UK. So far this year, we've seen 250,000 incidents in our stores. That is 42% up on this time last year. So as Paul said, they're seeing it in Central, we're seeing it in Group, we're seeing it, I'm sure, in mid-counties and Southern East of England. We're seeing an exponential rise. It's point number one. Point number two is this is not, in the main, people who are stealing to feed themselves. This is not, the people who are stealing are not those who are most affected by the cost of living crisis. Of course, the cost of living crisis is creating a market for stolen goods, but the individuals that are targeting our stores, and the reason we've seen a 42% increase, is through persistent and prolific offenders. The ACS estimate that 2/3 of the crime that are seen in convenience stores are by the same individuals. And it's those persistent and prolific offenders that we need to get a hold of. And just to amplify what Paul said, this is, of course, a huge danger to our colleagues. It's also a huge danger to the shops that we run, because there will come a point where some shops are no longer viable to run because it costs too much money to try to keep colleagues safe, and we are unable to. It costs too much money in terms of the loss and the measures that we have to take. And of course, when we all know that when you see boarded up shops, you see communities that are facing tough times. And so we really do need to think about shops as anchor institutions in those communities. Paul's absolutely right that all cooperative societies are investing hugely in what we can do. At Co-op Group, we've invested £200 million over the last few years on body-worn cameras, on guarding, etc., etc. And I think what you've heard from Paul is very well put, in that we need to be clear that as far as cooperative retail societies are concerned, the first responsibility to keep colleagues safe and shops safe is ours. We absolutely recognise that. We absolutely take that seriously. But what I would say, and I'm pleased that Emily's on the line and there's some good work being done in Merseyside, we need help from the police. The freedom of information request that Paul alluded to did say that 70% of times the police do not attend in serious incidents. I'll add to that the citizen's arrest. I was actually on the panel at the Tory party conference when the policing minister came up with his whiz-old-bang idea of citizen's arrests. We make hundreds, if not thousands, of citizens' arrests every year through our specialist undercover guarding teams. In 80% of occasions where we have the offender detained using citizens' arrest powers, 80% the police do not turn up. We therefore have to let them go. It is pointless, in fact, it's worse than pointless to detain someone only to let them go. So where do I think we are now? I think over the last 2 months or so, I think we've won the argument that says it's a big problem. I think that's recognised. I think it's recognised that the police response to date has been poor, and that, you know, it is what it is. There's no point looking back on it. It's what we do going forward. But I think that's recognised. And I think the real debate now is what happens next. And that's why I think PCCs are so important, because what we do need is a more effective police response. We need to learn the lessons from Nottinghamshire, from Sussex and from Essex, where they've worked with, in particular, the Co-op Group, but also in Nottingham, Nottingham Central Co-op, work with us, identify the hotspots, identify the prolific offenders. And as a result of those partnerships in a relatively small number of police forces, we've seen 100 individuals convicted, we've seen 30 years of custodial sentences, 6 years of criminal behaviour orders, and a large number of rehabilitation orders as well. This is a soluble problem. You can fix this if you have the will on both sides to come together to fix that. We will have about 40 MPs in our stores over Us Doors Respect for Shop Workers Week. We are in the process of inviting every single PCC to our stores. Emily, as she said, is visiting Tranmere Court on Friday, and I hope, Emily, you'll come back during Us Door Week as well. And we'll also be inviting every Labour and Co-op Police and Crime Commissioner candidate to visit stores as well. I think it's really important because there's an opportunity here in the run-up to the election, the PCC elections in May, for cooperative party members, for co-op society members, to be able to ask those questions, which someone like Emily can answer genuinely and sincerely about what she's doing to hold the police to account and to make sure they take it seriously. We need that across the country. So right across the country, I think there's an opportunity for cooperative members and cooperators to once again get their campaigning boots on and start to write the letters and begin to ask the questions of those PCC candidates, as they will be in May. What are you going to do to tackle persistent and prolific shop offending, and the violence and abuse that often goes with it. There's a real opportunity in May, and I hope we'll all come together as a movement, as we did previously, to get that ask in and to get commitments and pledges from the PCCs. We've got less to worry about, frankly, with some PCCs. People like Emily understand it, take it seriously, are trying to find out more, hence the visit on Friday. But there are plenty that we do need to push to further action. As cooperatives, we have that opportunity. Get our campaigning boots on again, and let's get those pledges out of PCCs as we run up to May. I'll pause there, Emma. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Paul. And I think, as you say, a really good summary there of where we've been, where we've got to, and now the kind of the task that lies before us, and how we as cooperative party members and as members of this great movement can get involved in the coming months. So opportunity now for questions. We have had one or two questions that have come in through the chat, but does anyone want to put their hand up? Alif, do you want to? Oh, forgive me whilst we'll just unmute you so that you can ask your question. Alif, you should have got a request through there letting you unmute. Has that come through? One tick. There you go. I've asked you to unmute. All right. I think we're having a little bit of difficulty. So if you want to put your question. Oh, there we go. Happy days.
I wonder if we are looking at events rather than prevention. If we have no smoking zones at the beginning of the shop, at the front, why don't we have plaque things on no thieving? I've never seen that. I've seen little things like we prosecute everybody. We must have that, because if you're closing the door after the thing has happened, do we have a campaign in front of the shop? Do they know when they come into the shop, this is a zone that is, we will prosecute you, and this you cannot steal? I've never seen that. Maybe there is, and maybe it's too cheap. But I think a work on prevention at the entrance of the shop will not go amiss. That's my idea. Thank you.
Thanks, Alice. Much appreciated. I'm glad we got to unmute you in the end. What we'll do is we'll do a round of 3 questions, just so that we can hopefully fit as many in as we can, and then I'll come to the panel and let them come back to the points that have been made. John Maltby, you should have had that request through to unmute as well. There we go.
I'm wondering what. There must be a lot of footage taken in the shop of shoplifting. I was wondering if there could be a board where some of this footage could be put up. Also, send it to the police straight away rather than wait.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you very much for your question, John. And then last of the round, I'll come to David, if you want to come in with your question, and then we'll go back to the panel.
Thanks, Emma, and thanks, Paul, for the kind words about the stuff I was able to do when I was a Member of Parliament. I just want to ask, have we got a 5-point plan for the Co-op party that we can put into the system about what is the action that's needed to be taken? And I just think, even from listening to the discussions today, things like lifting the £200 limit, which we opposed in Parliament at the time as Labour and Co-op MPs on shoplifting, is number 1. Number 2, upholding the law on alcohol, tobacco, solvent, knife sales. Anybody who has a tax on them upholding the law, that is a very strong aggravated offence. That's item 2. Item 3, the prolific offenders that Emily mentioned. Could we argue for an increase in drug treatment orders, an increase in alcohol treatment orders, for a first, second, third, or fourth offence, if they're caught, some sort of community penalty that links into the impact of shoplifting. Can we put that in the programme? And perhaps, number 4, can we give support for the stuff that Paul mentioned about, physical, home office grants, for example. The Home Office, I was police minister once upon a time, 100 years ago. The Home Office had grants for community safety issues. So can we help support, not necessarily the co-ops and the Sainsbury's and the big retailers, but the small corner shop retailer might need help and support to put some of the infrastructure in to help prevent some of the shoplifting and violence that's taking place. Can that be part of the programme? So I suppose my question generally is, have we pulled this together? Maybe I should know this, but have we pulled this together in terms of a co-op party platform on the 4 or 5 things that we can do, and then get that into the decision makers who are going to form the next government, be they, as I hope, Labour and Co-operative, or even if it's the current government or a mixture of anything else? Because government last time, when we had the campaign with Paul, did produce a consultation document, did potentially move a little bit on that, and we can do that, but with the clarity of a 4 or 5 pledge plan.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, David. We'll come to each of the panelists, and then hopefully I'll be able to do a wrap up, and then we'll see how we're doing for time. So Paul, if I come to you first. Paul Gerrard. Realised there were 2
I was worried then. And then I got the message saying it was on mute. So I'll try and let me deal with the CCTV one first. You're absolutely right. Most of the stores where there's problems, it would be true. It's true in group. It'll be true in most cooperative sites, and most shops will have CCTV footage. I think there's issues if you're going to post images of people on a board when they've not been convicted of anything. I think that might be a little risky. What I would say is that all that footage, when we have it, we send to the police. Unfortunately, if the police aren't turning up, there's not a lot of point in doing it. There are a number of police forces that I know where we've now taken to not only sending it electronically, but sending any other material by recorded delivery. Because when we've sent material by post previously, police forces have lost it. So you're absolutely right. The CCTV footage is there. Most, as I think Paul described this, we are building the evidence packs that can be used, but the police have got to turn up to use them, and they're not at present. Hopefully that's going to change. In terms of the visible deterring signs, I think absolutely that there's a place for that. What I would say is, if you've got people walking into a store with a wheelie bin to take out the entire meat section, or they're walking in with masked men with syringes to jump the kiosk 3 times a week, that's not going to deter them. And the reason they're doing that is that they do not believe there is any risk to the reward that is available. So I think you're absolutely right, Alex. I think there's a place for that. But if you want to tackle the significant problems that retailers are facing, that won't do it. It will require much more effective action. Although I would say your point about prevention is important. And I think Emily referred to this and Paul referred to this. Like Central, we funded offended to rehab in the West Mids. I think there's something about getting under the skin of it. And the last thing is, David, absolutely agree. There are asks that we brought through. One of the things we're hoping to do as we run up to PCC elections is have a pledge that will have 3 or 4 key points that we want PCCs to commit to. And I'm hoping that will be a pledge, not from just the co-op group or indeed cooperative societies, but from the whole movement. But you'll appreciate there's a little bit of work to do between now and then. But I've noted down all 5 that you mentioned, David. You might see them again.
Brilliant. Thanks, Paul. Emily, I don't know if there's any kind of additional points that you wanted to pick up, particularly around that prevention work that you were talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the challenge we've got in terms of when you connect it to other crimes. So where you have got individuals and where it's individuals and they are doing it because they are fueling a drug habit or something else, clearly locking them up isn't the answer. And so we have to put that rehabilitation work in space, and we have to look at how we can try and prevent the thing that's driving that. I think when it's linked to more organised crime, I think this is where we really need to be connecting it up. And there's a huge amount of prevention work going in the organised crime space in terms of who are those individuals individuals that are, you know, getting pulled into criminal gangs, and what is that journey to go from for someone on the street to then, you know, robbing stores and shelves of meat and everything else. So I think it's about understanding what the motivations are and how we can get better at intervening in that. I will say, you know, and it kind of picks on David's point as well around, you know, where is, you know, the investment or what is the ask? There is so little out there in terms of resource at the minute. We've seen bits and pieces filtering through, and, you know, to give some credit to this government, they have, you know, started to put a bit of funding into this space for PCCs in particular. And as PCCs, we give grants as well to lots of agencies, community safety partnerships, to try and do some of that prevention work. But it needs long term and needs to be sustainable. And if we're really going to kind of disrupt some of this activity, we need that. We just need to be sustainable funding. So I think this is definitely something that certainly I've appealed to the Shadow Front Bench around, to make sure that they recognise that, so that we can try and invest a bit more and probably see a bit more of that prevention work going on. The only thing I would say as well, just about the footage, I think there's some interesting stuff going on, and probably Alan Michael, who's a Labour Co-op PCC in South Wales, is very much in this space, and there's probably something around it, although I say it with a cautious hat on, around artificial intelligence. So actually, when we're seeing the same faces, if they have already been convicted and they are turning up in the same shops and they know they are banned from it, actually there should be tools in place to flag that with security on site, who can then intervene and hopefully prevent them from even entering the store, because there would be something in their restrictions that would say they can't enter the store. So I think there's other things that we probably could start to look at in terms of identifying those prolific offenders and people knowing, you know, when they intervene. But it's very much the post-conviction space, as Paul says, it's a bit challenging when they haven't been convicted yet. But I think there is definitely scope to do more in this space. But again, it comes down to investment and resource.
Thank you so much, Emily. And I'll come to Paul Dennis now to see if there's any other kind of points you want to make. I don't know if in particular around the kind of the work that you did in that Hickens Lane store might be quite relevant to what was being suggested there.
Yeah, I think Paul and Emily have covered it actually, so I'd agree with what you said. But the one thing I'd just perhaps pull out is I think we need to think differently about the prevention point, and I think there's an example we've got at. There's so many examples, that's the problem with some things going on, but St John's in Kettering, we had a massive issue with young people, nothing to do, nowhere to go, to Emily's point around funding and David's as well actually. So, you know, all of the youth services is no more really, but essentially what we did is the store manager went into the school, met the kids, did a session on, you know, the impact of crime, and also we set some work experience up. So there are different ways to look at this, and I think prevention is around, you know, there's something around people knowing that they're going to be prosecuted. A-lift, I think is it, and sometimes I think that can be more prevalent. You can put barriers in, but as I say, it doesn't stop the people with the wheelie bins, or they're just determined really, which is the biggest issue. But there's definitely thinking differently around prevention. So I definitely think that's an important thing to put out there. And yeah, the footage is interesting because I have my own business, and I would have put the faces of the perpetrators into hell with it, to be honest with you, because if you're feeding your family and you need to stop them doing it, then community pressure is really important. Now, clearly with GDPR and the risks of the huge fines for that, you know, that you can't go there as a professional cooperative movement. But what you can do is, and we're working with some of the police forces, the police can do it. So if the police are after a prolific offender, they can actually authorise that face to go out there. And Emily's nodding, because I do think there's something there around a lot of these crimes in Hickens Lane was a few people doing a lot of bad stuff. So you get the few people. Because, you know, in all truth, if someone's licking a bit of cheese to eat, that's not the problem. It's about the people who are majorly acting. So I think that's probably the thing to think about, how we can do that in a way that's safe and fair.
Thanks very much for that. And just to wrap up that particular round of questions, particularly focusing on the points that David was making, I mean, we were really pleased with Labour Party conference last week and the commitments that were made by the Labour Front Bench there, which were things that we in the movement have been lobbying for around specific offence, around the increase in neighbourhood police officers, and around, as you mentioned, the removal of the £200 threshold. And as Paul has talked about, there are particular things that we're pulling together ahead of the PCC election, but I think the idea of kind of wrapping that up together is a nice one. And as I said, is those as Paul said, sorry, pulling those kind of points that you've mentioned as well would be something that would be really helpful. So there will be more going forward, but thank you for that. We'll come to our next round of questions, which will be our last one. So if we can be fairly succinct in them, and first we'll come to David. So David, you should have just had a request there to unmute if you want to ask your question.
Could we not bring in physical punishments, but not like things like cleaning cow sheds out? You know, there's mountains of poo in cow sheds that need to be shoveled out. And if we made that compulsory, that you had to go and work on a farm on a weekend and clean cow sheds out as punishments, I think that would act as a deterrent. So, cheers.
Thanks, David. And an interesting point there around the options for those who are found guilty of the offence. But I think it does actually draw into the ideas around community service and what community service looks like. And I'm sure Emily will have some comments around that, as I understand that that's a real challenging area actually, as to the different activities which those who are sentenced to community service are actually able to participate in. Eddie, if you want to come in with your question, you should have been asked to unmute there, so hopefully you'll be able to jump in.
Thanks, Emma. The unfortunate thing here is that the more publicity that's given to this major problem, the greater the encouragement is for the offenders to carry on and for people to start stealing from the stores. I think it's a bit unfortunate that, but obviously it can't be helped. My understanding is that if we apprehend, if we see somebody in the store and they're stealing stuff, you can go up to them, but you've got to watch your personal safety. But if they put items into a closed bag, we cannot ask them to open that. So is there a legal point there?
Well, interesting question there, Eddie. I have to say it's not one that I'm versed in, but perhaps one of my panelists will be able to come into it. Just before we go to them, I did just notice that we did have a question in the chat, which was around, and I can't remember, forgive me if it was Emily or Paul who talked about it, but the kind of retail watch networks and how much they're being used and how effective they are at kind of that warning system that was mentioned of alerting other shops to kind of activity or individuals who are up to that type of crime in the area. So if we're able to get a response on that. And then there was a question as well just around private security teams, which I think has been kind of touched on by everyone in the kind of comments that have been made about the investment that has been made in security for stores at the moment. But if there's any kind of further detail which anyone wanted to touch on, there's an opportunity there as well. So Paul Dennis, I'll reverse my Paul order this time. Paul Dennis, I'll come to you first. And there's any other kind of other wrap-up comments that you want to make, and same for Emily and Paul, when I come to yourselves, we'll go through them now. So Paul Dennis.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Emily. Thanks, David. When I worked in Cairo, there's some interesting police punishments for shoplifting, but yeah, I suppose it's I definitely think there's something in community activity almost doing some good on the back of getting caught. So that's an interesting comment, but it's not something we're particularly pursuing at the moment. It's more the rehab side of things at the moment, I guess. The publicity is interesting. I do think, yeah, I mean, it's unproven, but I think that certainly the word is out that if you threaten and pull a knife out, the colleagues aren't going to do anything about it, and that's rightly so, I suppose, Eddie. So I suppose there is a degree of it is out there. Hopefully, if we can get the message out there about the deterrence and the success of perpetrators getting caught, that's just as powerful as actually the message that people are stealing. So I'm hoping that could be a double-edged sword, and we can get some benefit out of the good publicity of successes, actually, which is kind of what's happened around Nottingham, actually. And then, yeah, the local network we do use, it's really important. So my store managers will keep in touch with the local Tesco and Sainsbury's and all those, because they're all in it together, and it's really important. Actually, this is I think Paul touched on it, actually, this is a retail problem, not a co-op problem, and I think we've just got to work together and probably be the agitator and the catalyst for others to get on board. And I've seen some press statements from all sorts of people, actually, from the work that Paul's done, that we've supported with at Central, and we don't really care, because as long as the thing gets fixed, it gets fixed. So I do think that's something that we can work on. But local networks vitally important because it's the same people doing my local stores as doing the Tesco and the Sainsbury's. And yeah, private security. I suppose the thing to say there is we've really ramped up our plainclothes to put that deterrence in place. So it's a bit right to keep people guessing. You don't know if there's a plainclothes person there on the cameras, and we've had some success with that actually. So there's an argument to say, well, why would you do that? You've got the police force, but as Emily said, there is limited resource. So spending our money in a way that supports the police, I think, is absolutely vital. And so 70% of our security is now on plainclothes and the detective force, as you were, who can actually go and swoop in where you've got a problem to support the colleagues. So they'd be my sort of thoughts on the questions, and thank you for the questions and the thoughts. I mean, my wrap is this is absolutely fixable. We've just got to start, and I think if we can work together, you know, and David, we've not met actually, but I think the 5-point plan is a brilliant idea. I know we're on with that actually. So something powerful and simple that gets launched and then gets done. And if the PCCs can really get that passion that Emily said, and we're right behind it, then it's absolutely fixable. But you've got to start, and we've got to start now. So that'd be my closing view. Thanks, Em.
Thanks so much, Paul. Really appreciate those comments. Emily, if I can come to you next.
Yeah, I mean, not huge amounts to add. I think the point that David made around kind of, you know, working on farms and things, I think there is a real important point here around restorative justice and community payback. And actually, you know, if you get given a community sentence, it can very much be the rehabilitation bit is really important. But I think we do want people want to see that deterrent as well and see that there is a punishment as part of it. So actually, I think it's quite common that you'd have a community sentence that would have rehabilitation, but also some element of payback. And I think it would be perfectly appropriate that would be to be cleaning up a local high street or cleaning up graffiti or something that's around making amends to the community or the shop or the impact that you've had. And I definitely think that's a good way. And we see the power of that as well in terms of people understanding the impact, because a lot of people think the shoplifting is a victimless crime. You know, they think actually it's not going to affect anybody because the businesses will be insured and they'll just, you know, get the money back. But actually we know that the scale of it is much more than that. So I think there's a real power in people making amends and actually that being part of their kind of sentence, as it were, even if we do the rehabilitation stuff as well. So there's definitely something in that. And I think the community being involved in what some of those, you know, deterrents and those kind of activities look like, I think is a really important way to bring the public into that conversation as well and help to reassure them that there is action being done and people are making amends for some of this work. So I think that's something, I suppose my final wrap up would just be, I think just to all of you, go and speak to PC candidates. I think getting it into the police and crime plan early on is really important. That is what the chiefs will be held to account for. You know, there are challenges around resources. We can't get away from that. You know, Merseyside in particular has had huge challenges in terms of some of the serious incidents that we've seen, but that doesn't mean that we should, you know, ignore everything else. And so having it in the plan and making sure that we are actively asking the right questions of chiefs, I think is a really important part of how we continue to make progress on it. So that would be my kind of plea, I suppose, is to go away and continue those conversations with other PC candidates, which I'll do as well.
Thanks very much, Emily. And I think those points around restorative justice are a really important one, but also talking about where we can go next with it and how we can take the campaign forward to achieve the change that we want to see. Paul, Gerrard, if I can come to you for your final responses and comments.
Well, I think it's been a really great conversation. It's great to hear from fellow cooperators. I guess my point would be we have an opportunity to influence, as Emily said, what police forces do. There's a chance to raise the issue again during Us Respect for Shop Workers Week. There'll be lots of things on social media, lots of things in the media. Please share it, please read it. Please write to your existing PCC, and then I hope as we get towards January, February next year, and PCC candidates are confirmed, that as a movement we'll begin to write to those candidates around the kind of pledges that David described, so that we can begin to get this into police and crime plans, as Emily has described and Emily has done, but plenty of others don't. So I guess my last point is watch this space, get ready to get your campaigning boots on, because I think we've got some work to do. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. And just to say a huge thank you to all of our speakers this evening. I think it's been a incredibly thought-provoking debate, but I think as is the one of the best parts of our movement is that we are very keen to find practical solutions to the problems which our communities face. And I think that this is absolutely an example of those. And it's been really interesting to hear people's reflections and their ideas but also to think about those things that we can take away and that we can get on with and that we can do in our own communities and with our elected representatives and candidates going forward. And I think it's a really interesting point that's been made this evening about kind of the publicity around the campaign. And whilst there's absolutely a responsibility with us all to make sure that that we are talking about what is happening in our stores, let us all go away and, as Paul said, you know, strap on our campaign boots and make sure that we are achieving the outcomes that we need, that we're achieving the change, we're achieving the commitment, so that actually the story that we can tell is about how it is Labour and cooperative candidates, Labour and cooperative MPs and elected representatives who are achieving the change that we want to see. They're the ones standing up for workers and communities. They're the ones who are making the protections that are necessary. They're the ones who are making the change. So let's all go and be part of it. And thank you all very much this evening. Take care. Bye.